Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
Frank from Tested.
And today we're going to give you a little bit of an instructional. Well, Frank is. Last month we showed you some basics about airbrushing. And it's really not that difficult to get started with as long as you have the right tools and a little bit of know-how about paints and what things mix. But there's also some maintenance involved.
Yeah, we've gone over airbrushing a bunch of times on a bunch of different videos, but one thing I really want to do is just field strip an airbrush, completely tear it apart and put it back together, show how to really clean it, because like just doing basic cleaning maintenance between changing colors or between things is one thing, but really knowing how to take all the parts, all of it apart and put it back together, you kind of need to know, otherwise you'll just start losing springs and you'll mess up your airbrush.
The anatomy of an airbrush.
Yeah.
So what tools are we going to be looking at today?
Well, we have our airbrush. This is just a Iwata Revolution. We've been using this a ton in past videos. Iwata has a little cleaning kit that they've put out that has a whole bunch of the solvents and the lube and the wipes and everything in it. So we'll use parts out of the kit, and we'll use their little studio wipes, which are awesome.
We love those, like the baby wipes for airbrushing.
Yeah.
And so you got like Q-tips.
Yeah, Q-tips. There's little
pipe cleaners.
Well, there's pipe cleaners, and then there's these what are these things called?
They look like eyelash.
Cleany things. Internet, you're gonna yell at me. I can't remember what the cleany things are called. But there's a bunch of different sizes. They get really small. They get really big.
Okay.
But you can also, you don't have to go find these. I got these at an automotive store for cleaning like industrial like spray guns. There's these little dental tools that are pretty similar. And you can get a whole pack of these things for like $10. And they're disposable.
They're used for your teeth?
Yeah, you clean them between your teeth.
Oh, it's like flossing devices, kind of?
Yeah, I don't know. They're called Dentec.
And you can use them also for cleaning airbrushes.
Cleaning airbrushes. Q-tips, the little airbrush lube stuff to keep everything moving. And this is a nifty little tool that Iwata has for taking the little tip out of the front of the airbrush, the little cone.
Interesting.
So. And
then also, do you need a compressor connected to clean an airbrush?
It helps to have the compressor so that you can back bubble and you could flush stuff through. This one that I'm using today is Iwata's new battery powered compressor.
You don't even need to plug it in?
Don't need to plug, well, I have it plugged in right now, but you can unplug it and look at that.
How long is that gonna run?
I don't know, I haven't really like put it through its paces yet, but I like it so far. It's pretty small, pretty compact. You can set it down or stand it up, run it.
Airbrush on the go, have it in your backpack.
Exactly.
Just like airbrushing, run down the street on a bicycle.
This is for all the graffiti kids out there.
Yes, detail work on the mission walls.
So we'll use that to kind of use a little airbrush pressure.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's step one to taking an airbrush apart?
Okay, assuming that this was a dirty airbrush, you always want to run some solvent through the airbrush. So this is...
And that's just your isopropyl?
Yeah, this is 99% alcohol. And I'm going to spray it, and then we've showed before that if you put your finger on the front and you pull the trigger back, it back bubbles. Yeah. And so that forces air pressure back through the cavity to dislodge any kind of paint that's in there.
Gurgling that airbrush.
Yeah. So you do that a couple of times. Sometimes I'll take a brush and I'll use that to kind of scrub any kind of paint out of the inside.
Okay.
And then sometimes I'll take a Q-tip if the tip is dirty, and I'll get all that stuff in there. So that's like your basic just cleaning everything out.
How careful do you have to be about the needle, about things getting stuck inside, about doing any potential damage?
Well, right now the needle's pretty protected because it's got this little tip, this little cone on there. But if you take that first part off, now your needle's exposed.
And that's just unscrewing it.
Yeah, that's just unscrewing that first part. So now your needle's exposed and you don't want to stab yourself with it. But this is, you could take this thing off to clean any gunk that gets around here or that's stuck in this little cone. So that's part of the front.
Are you just dipping that in alcohol, the Q-tip?
And alcohol or airbrush cleaner stuff from Iwata Works. This is like a detergent-based cleaner.
Okay.
This or the alcohol. It's kind of it depends what kind of paint you're using. I'm assuming you're using like acrylic, like we've been doing lately. And the next thing is
so
that
removing more of the nozzle.
Yeah, so this is the little part that forces the air when you push the button down across the tip of the airbrush. So that's what this piece does. And then in there, you have the little. This is the actual nozzle tip, the cone.
And you need a special tool to.
You can get a little pair of pliers, but this just keeps it so you don't mess it up.
Okay. And that
loosen it with that.
Yep, loosens.
And that is tiny.
Wow.
So you have to be careful with that one. And take the back side off.
So a lot of it's unscrewing.
It's all unscrewing. It's built to kind of come apart pretty easily. And then this is called a chuck nut. So you take that off. Take the pin, the needle out. So there's your needle. And this is where you want to start inspecting stuff. You want to see if the tip of that needle's bent, or if the tip of this little cone is cracked or bent or anything like that.
Are each of these parts replaceable?
Yeah, you can get replacement parts. When you buy this airbrush, it comes with a little diagram of what all the parts are, and then you can go like on. I'm sure every airbrush site has these. Every manufacturer. But yeah, so then this whole trigger assembly is it's got a spring in there. So you take this back part out. This is what controls the tension of the spring. Then there's your spring. You got to be careful not to let that fly across the room or anything.
Oh boy.
And then this is what holds the needle and gives you the back pressure on the trigger. And there's your trigger.
Assembly. Okay. And then now it's time to.
So there you go. So that's
unscrew.
So that's your airbrush.
And then this final part is just one piece?
It is. There's a couple little things in here. If for some reason your paint explodes and it gets down into this valve, you might have to take this valve apart.
Wow.
I've only had to take the valve apart like once in about 20 years of airbrushing. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But what you do is you get a little pair of pliers in there, and I'm sure there's probably some kind of special tool to do this, but there's a little brass retainer in there.
And you're just twisting that part off.
Yeah,
everything is screwed together.
Everything's screwed. So once you get this little brass piece out, there's a spring in there which holds the pressure on the valve and the actual valve.
Right there. That's the valve right there.
So there's the valve and the spring.
And the cap there.
So now there's pretty much nothing left in here to take apart. This whole body of the airbrush could be cleaned without having to screw up seals and stuff. This little valve has a seal on it. So again, if you end up gunking this all up, you have to take solvent, and you can put this in a sonic cleaner or get these Q-tips and these little scrubbers. And you could take this and you could, fish these things through.
Is there anything you should be worried about, like any type of solvents you shouldn't use? Or, for example, we're talking about cleaning when we're using acrylic paints. If you're using different types of paints, is there a different process?
Whatever paint you're using, you want to use the appropriate solvent. Some paints will set up and they're really hard to get out, like silicone paints. If you let it set up in there, sometimes the silicone will bind to the coatings inside of here, which makes it hard. Or if you're using automotive paints, the urethanes will harden and set up. So if you're using a catalyzed paint, you don't want to let it set up. You want to get it out as fast as you can.
Now, how frequently should you do something like this, take it apart and completely disassemble it?
If you do between paint maintenance, like just cleaning all the regular parts out, and you use good practices to not get paint all over the place, you don't have to do this very often. But it's good to probably do at least once a year, is to just strip the whole thing, dump it in a sonic cleaner, or just scrub everything, polish it up, make it real nice. The one thing you want to avoid doing is scratching any of these parts, because once you start scratching it, then your pieces don't fit in real smooth, and the airbrush doesn't work as well, and paint will stick more. So to put it back together, we'll go in reverse of what we just did.
Thank you. Thank goodness you're not making me do this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see.
So you have to. An easy way to do this is to look at the manual. It'll tell you how to put it back together.
Valve goes in first.
Put the valve in. You got to make sure you put it in the right direction.
Okay, which means the gasket was facing the inside.
Yep.
Then the spring.
Then the spring.
That part.
Now the reason I hate taking apart the valve
this cap
is getting this little brass retainer back in there.
Because you need to use the pliers.
You got to use the pliers,
and
you
holding that in place while turning the airbrush.
Yeah, it's just tricky, and a lot of times it takes like 2 or 3 times before of course, I got it in the first time.
Yeah. Nice.
And then you got to be careful not to like over crank on these things. Because if you over tighten stuff, it just doesn't work properly.
All right, from there, trigger assembly. So the trigger first.
Yep, trigger, and the trigger, it's got a little dangly part. Let's see if I can. Right, there's a little dangle part right here. So you have to, when you put that in, you want to drop it into here and get it into that hole there, which pushes down on that valve that we just put together.
Okay.
So get the trigger in and make sure that the valve is moving down there. See
right, so you can actually see.
Let's see if we can.
The other way.
All right, which one am I on? This.
There you go. Yep, there you go.
That one.
There you go. So when you have the triggers, I can see it moving. There you go.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that that valve is moving correctly.
Okay.
And actually, you know what? All of this stuff, when you put it back together, you can use a tiny bit of this lube. You don't want to get too much on there because then it just makes everything like gooey.
So you're talking about 1 drop?
A fraction of a drop.
Fraction of a drop.
Just a touch of it, just to keep everything moving good. Put a little bit of that on there. That back in there. And then...
Now, to hold it all together, can you use like a set of help hands?
You know, I haven't had to do that before, but I'm sure it would help if you're having a hard time.
Yeah.
Next piece is the little trigger pull thing. You need to make sure that the top part has it's thinner on the top, and so that piece has to go in, kind of stick up through the hole like that.
Okay. Then the spring.
And the spring.
Then the back.
And this is the tensioner.
Yeah.
So when you put the tensioner on, if you push your trigger all the way back, put the tensioner on until it hits.
And then you know how it'll bounce.
Yeah.
Properly.
If you this one doesn't go. Some of them you can tighten it too far to where it'll stop the trigger. But this one just goes all the way in.
Nice.
And that's that. So then we move on to the front of the airbrush.
Needle.
So again, all these parts you can clean out with a little dental pick. You want to make sure not to damage this tip. This is machined like super, super thin. In the little Iwata cleaning kit, it has a little magnifier.
Wow.
So you can see, you can make sure that the see, where are we at?
Right there. Yeah. There you go.
There you go. You can magnify in there, and you can see this little tip to make sure that you don't have any splits in it. A lot of times, because this needle and this tip is machined to fit so well together, if you drop it or if you crack it, or if the needle's pushed in too hard or too far, it'll split it, and then your airbrush will start spattering. So you can just gently screw that on with your finger, and then use the tool. Again, you don't want to like crank down on this stuff. Just barely finger snug. If you crank down on it too much, you could strip the threads, and then you have a problem. So once you get that needle tip back on there, then you can feed the needle back through. And I like to take and put a tiny bit of this lube on there, like barely a drop.
Yeah,
and then I just kind of
spread that around.
Spread it all the way around. You don't want to have like residue on there, but you want to give it a little bit of a coating. And you push that in, and when you push it in, it comes out of the tip. But you don't want to cram it in there because you'll split that tip. So you just put it in there until it stops, and that's it. And then this little chuck nut, all that does is clamp down on this needle. So now the trigger pulls the needle back, and it won't cram it into the tip too far, or not have the needle seated well enough in the tip. So you just a little fiddly, make sure everything's put together right. Put that back on.
And your 2 cones in the front.
Yep.
Small cone, then big cone.
And the big one, again, you could take any of these little cleaning things and clean out the inside of it.
Yep. And the same solvent can be used for everything.
Yeah, whatever you're using. I like to, even with the detergent-based cleaners, like I'll usually run alcohol through the whole thing anyways.
Here's a moment of truth.
That's it.
That cap in, plug in that compressor. All right, Frank, let's see. Let's run a little more alcohol through it. Oh, yeah, it works.
Everything's back to normal.
Now, when you have reassembled it, what are the things you can test to see that you've properly reassembled it? Obviously, you see it working as normal. You start immediately drawing circles, drawing lines, and seeing if it feels like it felt before?
You know, if you just do a couple little sprays, you can just use alcohol on a paper towel, and you can see if it's spattering or something like that, or on a piece of paper. It should just spray without spattering. When you press down on the trigger, nothing should be coming out yet until you start pulling the trigger back.
And that's for a dual action.
For dual actions. For single actions, all of these airbrushes are similar in the way that there's going to be a valve, there's going to be a place where the paint flows, there's going to be some sort of a needle fitting kind of thing. And when you get your airbrushes, they all come with little diagrams of how everything comes apart and goes together. And if you just pay attention to it, it's not that hard. Some airbrushes get trickier. I have an Iwata TH, which has a lot more parts. And sometimes making sure that all those things are put together the right way and adjusted correctly gets a little tricky, but you do it a couple of times and you'll get really confident with it.
All right, awesome. Well, there are many airbrushes in the world, but that one is yours.
Yep.
And you've taken it apart and put it back together. Hopefully you guys learned something about proper care and maintenance of an airbrush. Thank you, Frank, for so much.
Thanks, Iwata, for sending us stuff to play with.
Yeah, and we'll have more projects using things like these airbrushes and compressors, painting up toys, building kits on Tested. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, and Frank and I will see you next time. Bye.